already. We are back for another episode, a December episode of the AI Tool Report live podcast. Today's guest is the co-founder and CEO of VISS.AI of Norditech AI, Philip Alm. We're going to jump into exactly what he does, how he's built this, and what the application actually does for you today. But in terms of Philip's background, from what I understand, he's a very good public speaker, a born entrepreneur from all the projects I can see from his LinkedIn and interviews, and a winner of many prizes, including the #1 startup prize at World Summit AI. So welcome to the podcast, Philip.
Thank you so much, Liam. It's very much a pleasure to be here. I hope we'll have a fruitful discussion today. I think it will be interesting for sure.
Definitely. And let's start things off on a bit of an interesting note. I'm going to start with the first question. It's going to be ambiguous for you. Why do you build cool shit?
I think that's something I was kind of born into. They usually call me and they say I was born with a laptop in my hand. And sitting very, very long nights at home as a kid, discovering programming at, an age of around 10, and then being able to basically create whatever you feel like. That freedom is something very unique. And at that point in time, finding that freedom and the capability to basically create whatever I wanted to solve at that point, whatever problem I had, I could kind of solve it myself. That's a freedom that kind of motivated me to build.
Interesting. So it's really that independence, that freedom, the ability to conceive of an idea and then go and actually create that and bring that to reality. That's really what's driving these creations for you.
Oh yeah, seeing them come to life, and especially I think there's a turning point, because I usually say this sometimes when I speak, which is I started out building stuff very early, right? I had a friend whose father was an engineer and taught us programming, quite deep programming stuff, which is not what you want to start with typically at a very young age. And then, we started building all this cool shit, like you're calling it. And it came to a point, around 14, 15 years old, where I started realizing you can build however many cool shit you want in your basement. If no one uses it, it's completely useless. And at that point, I kind of discovered this part of me where entrepreneurship became this natural next step to kind of take these creations and make sure that they're actually bringing some value into society, not just a cool thing I have in my basement that I'm never showing anyone. This is just mine. I'm keeping this for myself.
Interesting. So with that in mind, do you remember the first dollar that you made online, and with what application or what product did you kind of get that
Yeah,
first dollar?
yeah, I do. Believe it or not, it was Minecraft servers specifically, which is quite a. I don't think I've ever mentioned this to anyone publicly before, which is. No, I started building these servers, and not just actual servers. We built server infrastructure, but then also actually developing different types of ways of playing the game, and then released that, and got into understanding how does marketing work, how does how do you monetize products, how do you do upselling, like all of these concepts kind of came naturally from that. But believe it or not, it was Minecraft servers the first time. But then it kind of became the thing. We started doing everything. We started trying everything. I remember still we went around in the city and sold web pages to different pizzerias, for example. So that was fun. That kind of, there's so many things and so many ways you could make money online. And when you're 14, 15 years old, you're starting to discover that. That kind of opens up an entire new world of things you could potentially do. So.
Interesting. I mean, I hear many stories from lots of entrepreneurs of how they made the first dollar. Some are Amazon, some are drop shipping. I don't think I've heard Minecraft servers before, but I love it. We've all got to start somewhere.
Yeah, it was a passion of mine as a kid, and then that evolved into let's mix this with all my other passions, and then that became programming, servers, IT, then entrepreneurship, building a business around it, and that ended up being quite a good business, but very stressful for a 16-year-old when it actually kind of came to its peak to manage, and then have 15 other interests at the same time you want to try out. So.
I got you. Well, talk me through that. So, from what I can see, the earliest experience I can see on your LinkedIn is a tool called Convert Anything UF. It's your kind of first public one that I can see. Tell me about this.
Yeah, that's actually we have this thing in Sweden called UF, which basically stands for Businesses for Youths, and it's a concept that they've been trying for quite a while. You, as a youth, when you're going in high school, you're able to start a business under very much more friendly circumstances than a traditional, holding company or a company with actual stock. It's a temporary business. It's one that you have for a short amount of time, and then you can convert it into a real business if it works. But it's very flexible when it comes to taxes, things like this. And that's what the UF stands for on it. And Convert Anything was a project, again, with actually the same childhood friend who I learned programming with, where we converted anything. We made a web service to convert different file formats. And, these are very common today, but in 2015, 2016, I think it was 2016, 2017, maybe we did that. That wasn't really that common, but it was a super useful service. And that through that service, I actually met the co-founder of this company that I'm running today. So it worked out.
Interesting. I mean, the intuition I'm getting here is that you're trying lots of things, you're doing any entrepreneurial venture that comes to mind. There's lots of opportunities out there. You're making websites for pizzerias, you're building online tools. And then at some point, you pivot towards the world of AI. And I can see that in 2020, that's when you kind of started Norditech at that point. So maybe take me through the first time that you heard the words AI, machine learning, and like really understood it, and then that path from there to actually founding the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you're saying, I experimented a lot, which I'd love doing in my youth. There's so many businesses, micro businesses that I built that no one knows about, which was only for myself at that point to learn and to discover. But AI actually, I didn't know what AI was when I first heard of it. And I even remember, at 15, 16 years of age, I did a project in high school where I actually presented a model that was capable of learning languages, which is very similar to the technique that we're actually using for these large language models and generative AI that everyone's hearing in the news today. But at that point, I had absolutely no idea how it worked. I just found it really cool. And I was like, I have to show this to someone. And that kind of sparked the interest doing that project. But it didn't really come into any um, real thing until I started my first job as some type of a statistical analysis engineer, which kind of then automatically transferred to, okay, let's do AI. And it was in a project where we were collecting data from production machines producing these very fine, small plastic parts. And we took all this data and tried to predict, is this part going to be good or is it going to be bad? So we took all the data from machine and we tried to say, the part that it's currently producing, will it be good enough to use or will it be have to throw it away? And that at that point really got me deep diving into AI and really discovering how I loved it. And I can tell you this, like it wasn't fun at that point because here comes a 17, 18-year-old kid going out to a production industry where they're 50, 60-year-old men who have been doing this for 20 years. And I'm telling them, no, you maybe should think about doing this instead. They didn't like that very much. So that experience was interesting.
I can imagine. When did you make that switch from working for someone else to taking that leap to being like, I'm starting my own company and I'm running my own life now?
I'm pretty sure I always had that in the back of my head. I did do that the entire time, even working for other companies. I still had my, hobby businesses, whatever you would call them. They weren't making enough money because I was testing out stuff. It was maybe
Mm.
10 to 20,000 dollars per month, and then there's expenses. On top of that, it's maybe not enough to make a living out of. But then I did meet my co-founder that I mentioned earlier, and he met me at the fair where he actually won a competition in Sweden for these youth businesses that I mentioned. And he met me at that same fair when I was presenting. And after that, we took a breakfast. We started talking about, what are we doing? And ended up being that, okay, both of us are really into AI. We had worked in the industry quite a few years, even though we were quite young. And we decided that, okay, let's start this business together where we had all these projects spread around, like all of these AI and IT consultancy projects with our customers. Let's gather it under one roof and let's help each other, solve all of these things on a little bit of a larger scale. And that's how Norditech came to be.
Interesting. Do you remember your state of mind at that point? Was it Were you scared, terrified, excited? Like, what was going through your brain? What was the conversation you had with your family? We were like,
Oh
I'm
no,
out
I was
of this
scared
traditional
shitless.
role. I'm gone.
I was scared shitless for sure. At that point in time, I started studying actually in Linköping, another city at Linköping University. I started study engineering, which I actually, after a while, I started regretting that, right? Because I had already worked in the industry for quite a few years. So there wasn't really that much new that you could learn from it. And I still remember calling David on the phone. We had already founded the company at this point, but it was kind of just rolling a little bit extra on the side. And I remember calling him on the phone, make sure we have enough money to pay, the absolute most basic stuff, and I will quit uni today and we'll get going. Because I was so sick of laying at home. That was during COVID as well. So that was like you were laying at home, you had nothing to do. At that point in time, I had also hurt my back, so I was laying in bed a lot. Remember this call so vividly, calling him and just make sure we have enough to survive. I'll quit uni today and we'll just start working our asses off. And that's what we did.
Oh, you. Something I'm so interested in figuring out about specifically Norditech is you mentioned how it's basically you got a bunch of these products and services, a bunch of different things that you're doing, you're trying to bring it together under one roof. How exactly did you find your product market fit? How did you find the clients you want to work with, the service you offer, maybe a productized service? Like, how did you really niche down into what you're good at from all of these different angles?
I think in the beginning it was total chaos. To be more specific, we did consultancy services, right? Specifically within AI and IT. And that kind of opens up, you can do pretty much anything then. And we noticed already half a year in, he had this idea, David, the co-founder, he was so sick of doing salary payments actually in our company. And we said, why can't we just solve this using AI? Like we have to be able to solve this simple problem using AI. And we got into this mode of thinking, let's teach an AI how to use our ERP system, which is where we did salary payments. So we could teach an AI how to use it. And then we took that kind of one step further, which was, okay, let's just teach an AI how to use every single system that we use on a day-to-day basis. So not just our ERP system, but our messaging services, our email, our calendar, just teach it everything and then see if it can perform different tasks. And when we came up with that idea, which is around 3.5 years ago, we instantly knew that that's what we wanted to do. And we started transforming this consultancy business into a product business, which is a hard thing to do because you're stuck with all of these assignments. You have customers that you need to deliver to. And, that was a really tough period. Being able to still deliver while bootstrapping and trying to save money and investing it into building, well, at that time, a product that was really time consuming, really consuming a lot of our funds, and not being able to work full time on other projects to bring in the funds. So
Mm.
that journey was intense for sure.
And has that journey now been completed? Have you completely switched from consultancy to this productized service, which I'm assuming is VISS.AI?
Yeah, exactly. It's VISS.AI. Yeah, that journey has been completely done. In We actually bootstrapped. So bootstrap meaning you're earning money on the side to survive while you're building something. We did that for almost 3 years in a row, and then decided, okay, now it's enough. So we did start seeking an investment, and we brought on our first investment round in March 2020. And that kind of gave us the freedom to fully start focusing on just expanding our team, making sure we have a good team backing us and able to build products and kind of phase out these old projects as we go. And now we do not have any projects left. It's just this AI for us, and it's been that for quite a while.
Awesome. I mean, let's jump into this. I had a look over the website. I can see that your kind of mission statement behind this is to make AI accessible to everyone. Talk to me about the genesis of the idea of this AI and what you're really hoping to create, develop, and perform with it.
I mean, in a nutshell, what we want to do is make automation available for everyone.
Okay.
Because with this new kind of era that we're in with AI, you're able to just describe in natural language, which is something everyone can do. It's like talking to a coworker, and then we can transform these kind of language queries into actual useful things, right? In our case, what's happening in the background is, you're describing, oh, I want to find 100 receipts from my email, and then I want to bookkeep them automatically in my ERP system. You're describing this in words, but it's being translated in the background to code. So we have built these AI agents in the background that's actually writing code to perform these tasks. And that's how it's done in the background. You're basically running, like if you're talking to a programmer, your IT department, instead of going there, you talk to the system and you say, I want to automate this, and it tries to help you through the process. And I mean, the vision is very simple. We want everyone to be able to automate. We want people to talk about automations like you're talking about Word documents or PowerPoints, like throw together a PowerPoint. Yeah, throw together an automation. It's obvious. Just solve it real quick. It shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, I mean, that's the dream, right? I mean, as kind of head of operations of our business, there's a million and one like automations that we would love to get involved. Be like, I'd love to do this, I'd love to do this, I'd love to do this. But you need to either hire someone technical to build them or go through the steps and kind of building them yourself. With that being said, how do you account for mistakes between translating that natural language into coding instructions? How do you get it right every time?
Yeah, that was a tough one, I'll tell you. Holy. Yeah, you know, you have these inherent problems with this type of AI, generative AI especially. You always have this the problems of hallucination. It can just make stuff up. It can get things wrong 1 out of 100 times. If you're paying out salaries in a company with 10,000 employees and it mixes up 1 in 1,000, that's not acceptable. Like it's a mission
Mm.
critical thing. It cannot fail, right? And I'll tell you this, like we've built 11 versions of our product. So we've actually started over from scratch 11 times at this point. So we've thrown everything out because a lot of the time, the first 3 years were spent researching, right? And there were a few core problems we wanted to solve. The one you mentioned, we're calling the reproducibility problem, which basically means make sure it does the exact same thing every single time. And you hear all this fuss about AI agents, and you know they're really powerful, but they're really expensive, and they have these single points of failures. They kind of fail sometimes. And our first 7 versions of the product was pure AI agents, and then we realized this is not going to work. So it took us, 2.5 years probably of experimenting with AI agents to realize that this might never be solvable with the current type of AI that we're building. You would need a new type of AI, not large language models in the way that we're training them today with neural networks that kind of take in, text and try to predict upcoming tokens, for example, or upcoming segments of text, because they will never be 100% reliable. So we went away from that and then started thinking, okay, let's just make it easier to build them in the first place. And we started making our tool write code, which I mentioned, right? And at that point, code is something we know works. Like that's something we developers, we write code and it runs and it works. If it works one time, it's probably going to work the rest of the time, right?
Mm.
So if we could take that and kind of build this AI software engineer in the background that you're talking to, and then make that write reproducible code that actually runs the exact same every single time, that would solve all our issues, which then took another 4 versions to be able to get something that works. And today, that's exactly what's happening in the background of this.
Interesting. So, talk to me about that on a technical level. I come to you, I've got my business, we work with a type form, Google Sheets, and Beehive to send out emails, loads of different things. And I come to you and I say, I want to be able to describe in natural language. How do I get onboarded to VISS.AI and what's actually happening? What access does it need? What kind of things can I perform with it?
Yeah, so the way you access it, currently you're not, because we have a very high wait list and we're onboarding people as quickly as we can. But
Okay.
I'll be honest, we still want to do product development. So, the companies we're working with, we're kind of targeting these high level enterprises currently, and then opening up for more and more as we go. Because working with big enterprises, it gives us flexibility. We can listen to them, we can work very closely with them. We don't have to worry about overload and things like this. It's really good for us. But then, the vision, let's go talk vision then. As it's looking right now, if you actually have these apps, you have Beehive, you have Google Spreadsheets, you have Typeform, you're collecting answers, you're putting it into a sheet, doing some data magic on it, and then pushing it out, creating some email with it and sending it out. That's totally possible in the platform right now. So you would add these 3 apps as steps. So you would add a step for Google Sheets, you would add a step for Typeform, and you would add a step for Beehive. And in the Typeform step, you would literally describe just what you told me, something like collect all the answers from this survey that we created and try to batch them up in a nice structured way so I can look at it pretty. And then you say, okay, transfer all that data that we found in step 1 here to the spreadsheet and style it nicely with these colors. And then the third one would be, create maybe an HTML email that summarizes the data nicely and sends out a custom reply to every single person that filled out the type form. That could be an automation, right? And you would describe this in words in these 3 steps and then run it or schedule it, trigger it from Slack. You can trigger it from where you would feel like.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And does this just work through a web browser? Does it need to be downloaded as an application? Like, what level of access does it need to have to my computer to be able to perform the actions?
To your computer, it doesn't need access.
Okay.
What it does need access to, of course, is any external API integrations. So we're talking if you're sending emails with Gmail, we need to have access to, Gmail, the integration through
Yeah.
Gmail. And that's done completely in the background, encrypted. Like any type of application where you connect them together, you add Notion to Slack, for example, to be able to add stuff to Notion through Slack. That's an integration in the background. Exactly like that. VISS.AI just connects to Typeform in this case and pulls the data from what they have called their API, which is basically an interface to communicate with Typeform
Got
for
you.
developers.
So, with that being said, the way you describe the process is pretty sequential, right? As go and collect this data from the sheet, and then do this, and then do that. Is that how you account for potential mistakes as well, right? Because I could describe a complex process that has 8 different steps, and it might hallucinate at that point. Is it just best practice to do it step by step by step?
Yes, it's usually easier because we found this problem actually. This was one of the biggest problems we had to solve, which is that people, they think they have a great idea of what they want to do. They think they can describe it perfectly. And then you have an AI here that you need to teach what you actually want to do. And you have this thought on this is the problem I want to solve. You try to describe it to the AI, it will have an idea of the problem you want to solve. It's not going to be the same idea. It might be similar, but it's not going to be the same idea because in your head you're thinking about all of these extra factors, right? And you're not explaining it to the AI. So how would it know about it? So we had to work really hard to both make the AI, understand the user better and tell the user, okay, I need more info to be able to do this, but then also make the user kind of understand that you need to break this down so that it's easier to understand. Because I can open up a workflow from someone who's really good at doing stuff in this AI, and I can read it, and I have absolutely no idea what it's doing. And then you expect an AI to be able to write an automation that does this when you can't even explain it properly. So there's a very nice balance that you need to find about like trying to take the user's idea and approach it to the AI's understanding, and while also making the AI kind of understand more and ask questions and try to discover, what does the user actually mean here. So that's a
Interesting.
very interesting process to make it not hallucinate, to make it not make mistakes. It's usually human error in the end. Like actually, every single time, it's almost that the human, in this case us, we haven't described it well enough.
Yeah, interesting. And everyone speaks in a different way using different words and verbiage and vernacular. And I speak different from Martin, who speaks different from Arturo, who speaks different from you, speaks different from David, and so on. So everyone uses different words. My natural next question to that is the process of being able to communicate with this AI. Is it going to go more in the process of you have more conversations with the AI and thus understands how you describe things better? Or is it more in the way of educating the user to be able to speak in terms that the AI is going to comprehend? Or is it a combination of both?
It's definitely both. You
Okay.
can't have one and just expect that to be enough because this is one of those problems that will always be there. It's never going to be solved because you can't just transfer your thoughts into the machine. At least not yet. But we're almost there. That's a topic for another podcast, maybe. But that problem in itself, making someone else understand you, that's a communication problem that's inherent for humans in general. Like just communicating with another person, like I'm communicating with you right now, trying to explain what VISS.AI is. You will now
Yeah.
have a picture of what VISS.AI is in your head, which most likely is not at all what I have in my head, even though I'm trying to explain it. Right?
Got you. Talk to me about this from a business level. Right now, you are only working with larger organizations. There's a wait list to get onboarded. Why have you chosen this methodology rather than just releasing it as a SaaS and being like, people run wild, on you go, there's $100 a month for a subscription. Have fun.
There's two major reasons. Number one is we haven't been ready. Like I said, we did 11 versions of the product at this point, which is because none of them really worked. Like you have this problem with generative AI startups usually that they kind of get 80% of the way and they build these super, super amazing prototypes that are extremely interesting to look at, extremely interesting to try. And then users, when they sign up, they start using it, they come 80% of the way, they almost build something valuable, and then they get really frustrated because that 20% is really hard to solve. And that kind of usually ends up with meaning that you boost your numbers in the beginning and you can raise a lot of money, and then you end up with every new subscriber unsubscribes after 1 to 3 months, and you have a churn rate that is extremely high. And that we don't want to happen, and we still don't want that to happen, which is why we've been so focused on only taking larger clients because they have more patience. You're able to talk more and kind of cherish the relationship as well, not just relying 100% on that the product instantly does everything that they want to. So giving us that time to make sure that it actually works, which we feel like, we found that now, kind of ties into the next point, which is we're still gonna do that even though we feel like now we found it in the past 2 months here. So it's pretty recent that we feel like, okay, we found it finally. This is it. This is what we're doing. But you're still going to keep working with larger enterprises because everything else kind of comes on top of this now, right? You have to have onboarding, material, guides. We have to be able to onboard, maybe thousands or hundreds of thousands of people without needing to sit down and hold their hand for 2 hours. And creating that experience is the biggest hurdle moving up from now on for us to be able to do a global launch, which we really still want to do. We really, really want to do that.
Yeah. With that in mind, what do you kind of foresee the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years looking like for this AI?
That's always a tough question when we get it, but it's pretty clear the next 3 to 5 years in my head. This tool that we built is something that's insanely powerful, but it's still kind of hard to use if you're not a technical person. Even though we're kind of lowering the bar for how technical you need to be, you don't need to understand flows, you don't need to understand linearity in programming, you don't have to understand data mapping. Like, you don't have to understand this, but it's still kind of too difficult for an average, say, 30 to 40 year old person at a company
Me.
who's never touched programming, who's never touched workflow automation tools, to just pick it up and instantly know what to do. So that's in the vision for the next 3 years. Solving that will let us expand very quickly. And we have this concept that we call builders and runners, which we try to push quite a lot. Like, you have builders, more technical people, more patience, and then you have these runners who are people who they don't necessarily even have to know that VISS.AI exists. They just need to run something and get the value from it, right? Because people can build stuff. It kind of comes back to this basement thing that I mentioned at the beginning. You can build stuff, but if no one runs it, it's useless. So we're trying to
Mm.
make it easier to both run workflows, but also build them, right? And running them means meeting them where they need it, in Slack, in Microsoft Teams, in your email, instead of having to log onto an external platform, understand how to do stuff, add input variables, click run. This is not
Yeah.
something that a typical runner would do. So
Yeah.
that's in the future for sure.
I like the verbiage there. I'm a self-professed runner as well. The way I always describe projects to agencies we work with or people that we hire for projects is I am a complete idiot. So make sure that everything you do is in simple terms so that I understand it, because I, as a user, don't want to have to go into 3 degrees of complexity to understand a solution that you've provided for me, right? And I think that's the majority of people. I don't know what the percentage of people around the world are engineers or technical people, but I imagine it's 10% or less, right? I think 90% of people are idiots like me. They're just like, why is this not working? Make it work immediately for me. So yeah, I like that. I like that verbiage there. I want to jump into the product side of things. So I've used some automation tools in the past, so I'm not a complete idiot, but I'm close to it. I've used like Make, Zapier, stuff like that, and Zapier's got a similar feature where you kind of describe what you want done in Zapier in natural language and it builds it. How is VISS.AI different from that? What's your USB?
There's this is the most common question that we got in the beginning, especially when we started raising, a financial round, because you do this competitor mapping, and not only is there Zapier, Make, these types of tools, you have 400 different AI startups trying to solve AI automation, right? And it comes down to two major things that we always talk about. We do have something to moat, like that we call a moat, right? Which is, it kind of spun off from that we discovered that everyone's using different apps, right? Zapier, they have 8,000 plus integrations. And in the beginning, we went to a company, let's say a sales company, they're doing sales, and they have 50 different apps. And we go to a different company, maybe in the same industry, a different sales company, and they have 50 different apps. So there's a crazy amount of applications that people are using that are highly customized for specifically what they want to do. And solving that actually was what we spent the first 2 years doing. We built a system we call LFAs, language friendly APIs. It was just a better way for AI to understand how to communicate with APIs. And it's also what's letting us build integrations very, very efficiently. And that kind of transformed even now into the point where the user that's using this AI, they can just communicate with any API that they want. We don't even have to be involved. They can add their own APIs using natural language, which is something that
Interesting.
opens up a whole world of things that never was possible. Because you're working at Zapier, they have all of these, let's say 200 engineers just maintaining and working with APIs, right? And adding an API, if you're an engineer or have tech background in management, it's fucking hell. Sorry, excuse my language, but it's absolute hell. No one likes it. It takes 3 weeks to 3 months. It's repetitive, boring stuff. It never works. There's always problems. And instead of spending 3 weeks to 3 months, someone could add an integration in a few minutes now or a few hours that could work in VISS.AI, which is the biggest part of our IP that we think will let us actually scale extremely cost efficiently and also open up the door, right, for a lot of possibilities. Zapier can't integrate the small apps because it's not profitable, right? It costs too much to maintain
Interesting.
them. Even if they have only like a 0.5% of their user base, which is still like almost a million people, right, are using an app, it's still not worth it because it's too much work and there's not that much profit to gain from it. In our case, it's not even us doing it necessarily. They can do it. And that's the number one thing that's differentiating us from every single automation tool actually right now, building automatic integrations. And then,
Interesting.
yeah,
Sorry, I just want to stop on that
we
because
can stop
that's
on that for a bit, sure.
super, super interesting, right? So, with the process of the developing these API integrations, is there any authentication required? Because my understanding was always like, oh, Zapier has to form an
Yeah.
official partnership with this company to be able to get this API integration approved. Is that the case, or do you just need some sort of technical arrangement for these things to work together?
It depends on the API. For example, let's say Gmail, right? In Gmail's case, it's a Google app, and Google have quite strict rules on how you are allowed to use them. We do the integration towards Gmail. We at VISS.AI, like there's no point in every single customer setting up their own integration toward Gmail. And in that case, we have to start some type of a partnership. We have to apply to have accounts at Gmail to handle them. You get like a quota. You can use 100 accounts now in your app, and then it goes up over time. And that deal you kind of have to do if you're Zapier, which we also do for the bigger apps because it's nice to already have a package of 100,000 apps when you log into this AI that you can just use. But actually, all the other ones we're talking like any minor app, any larger app to actually, if you're integrating it yourself, it's just your credentials. Like this AI never touches anything, which means that it's basically
Oh,
like
yeah.
you're writing code on your own laptop integrating towards the API. There's like almost no difference. We're just storing credentials temporary for you so that it can actually run in a VISS.AI workflow, which basically lets you circumvent that authentication problems, which is usually like the biggest pain of building integrations is authentication never works. And that we can now solve. Then also same kind of thing. You're building it in natural language. You're also solving the authentication. In that case, you're pasting an API key or you're describing how to do OAuth2 callbacks, which is another type of integration authentication method.
Interesting. So, if I understand this, it's a combination of both, right? From one degree, you're doing these integrations from VISS AI for these bigger companies that people use a lot of the time: Gmail, Beehive, Typeform, Google Sheets. And then on an individual level, if there's some unique SaaS product that this business uses and no one else uses, they're connecting to that from an individual level. And VISS AI is only writing the code to authenticate that. It's not actually touching itself as a company, right?
Correct. Basically, you're just prompting this AI like you're prompting ChatGPT. Connect to this API. Here's the details about the API. You press enter, and then it builds it. So it's pretty much the same
Interesting.
thing as interacting with any service still.
And this, I want to jump into the technical side of you guys as well, right? So I'm assuming this technology and this code, this AI that you've kind of developed, is this all proprietary? And if we jump like one step deeper than that as well, are you running this off like Llama or ChatGPT, or is this all kind of built in-house, trained on your own data?
We actually do not train models at all. We did start out trying to train models ourselves, but you have to sink in so much money, especially on the data collection part and data verification part, that it's just not worth it. We did fine tune models at large scale to see if that would help us, but ended up just defaulting to any model instead. We tried to design the entire system so it's just agnostic to whatever model you want to use. It doesn't really matter which model writes the code, right? As long as it writes good code, we're
Mm.
happy. And same thing in the entire user experience, like all the feedback you're getting. Like it doesn't really matter which model it is, as long as it produces a predictable response, we're happy. And we're going to keep using, we're never probably going to train our own models. There's no point. We're never going to be able to compete with large enterprises like Meta publishing open source models that are larger than anything you would ever train yourself. So to that point, we're just using models that exist on the market.
Interesting. So let's jump back into this competitive advantage thing for a moment here. So from what I understand, there's organizations out there, they might be 10 people to 10,000 people. And a problem that a lot of them are facing, and that we've seen internally, AI Tool Report as well, working with companies, is that they incur some level of technical debt because they might use outdated systems, they use kind of micro SASs, specific niche SASs for particular things. And thus, they can't use tools like Zapier and Make for all of their things because they don't have the necessary API integrations to work with all of their systems. So then you fill in this hole. We can automate anything. So one is the API integration, and two is just that kind of selling point of we are able to automate anything in natural language. I stopped you at a certain point as well. It looked as if you might have went on to number three in terms of your competitive edge.
Yeah, well, I mean, the automating anything, I don't know if it's a competitive edge at this point because, everyone claims to be able to do that. So actually, the second most important thing is how we're designing the user journey. Like we're trying to remove all the blockers, not just like you see these automation tools that are visual and you kind of draw on them and you do nodes and you kind of describe each part of it, still do a lot of configuration. We decided very early on that we just wanted to be, you basically describe it in words and that solves everything. Data mapping, flows, like the logic behind it, like breaking up workflows into multiple paths. If something happens, then we should do this. If something else happens, do this. So we've taken a lot of time working on building these AI agents in the background that are building the workflows for you and the user experience, how to interact with them in a very different way than you see these node-based tools where you kind of connect things yourself. And
Mm.
all the data, for example, that you're using in a workflow, you're fetching these type form responses, you're fetching your spreadsheet, you're fetching your emails. All of this data that you're working with is just available throughout everything after you get it. So it means, when you're actually saying, okay, I want to put the type form answers into the spreadsheet, you literally describe it in that way. You describe it, okay, take the type form answers from step one and put them in the spreadsheet that we created in step two. That's how you refer to data. So it's not in the way that you would think like mapping data or drawing arrows. We removed all of that. We tried to just make it, okay, everything's available everywhere. Talk to your apps. That's what you're doing here. And I think that UX, that user experience, is still our biggest competitive advantage outside of being able to integrate with any service in reality. I think those are the biggest ones still.
I mean, it's the ultimate dream, right? Like the process just now, if we want something automated, is I hop on a call with an automations expert or someone internally that's technical on the team. I describe what I want, and then they go and build it and map it, right? And you're just removing that middle step where someone can describe exactly what they want automated, and then it's automatically built for them, right? There's no physical labor there involved. So I mean, I think that's the ultimate dream for most people, right? It's like, how do I do this with no technical experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we see this in, again, I come back to this builder and runner concept. It's a trend we see inside of companies, especially the ones that are currently using this AI. They start out with one builder and they build one workflow. And then they kind of start distributing that to five runners. And all of a sudden, you have five people running a workflow that saves each person 10 hours per week. And that's one workflow. And then they add two more builders, and then they start educating these runners to become new builders, and it kind of just spins off itself inside of the organizations, which is the effect we hope to see at scale later once we decide to just open it up for anyone, right? And I think that's because everyone wants to automate. It's just too hard to kind of get going, and you have these technological barriers that are still stopping you. You don't understand flows, you don't understand data, you don't, these problems that non-technological savvy people have never heard of even. It's lowering those barriers are going to be interesting in the next year here.
Interesting. With this, I think the audience and myself get a very good understanding of how this works on a technical level. So I want to take things a little meta for a second and understand more about the founding of the business and how that's run and how scaling has happened as well. So my first question and what I'm always most interested in is, one, how did you come up with the name? And two, how did you come up with the color scheme?
I love it. I love it. The name, it's so funny actually. The name actually came earlier than this version of the product. And we said it was for visual AI, VISS.AI.
I see.
Then at that point, we were actually doing something similar, like having nodes pop up and you kind of see what's happening going on everywhere. It's like lines flowing. And then we said, wait, why are we showing all this? No one wants to see this. There's no one's going to look at this. And we started removing that and just making it fully text based, and you have these, it just connects everything for you in the background. You don't have to care about it. And then that name just kind of stuck around because it instead became like, okay, it's easy to have an overview of see, you kind of see what the AI is doing. So it's still this visual part of AI. So that's where it came from, and it stuck around. And then, in for the color scheme, we found this amazing UI and actually logotype designer too. Every type of design you can think of, he can do. Who just moved to Sweden when actually the Ukraine war started. Unfortunately, he had family in Sweden, and they moved here in Stockholm. And he was quite young. The average age in our company, or the median age, is 22 years old, and we're
Wow.
10 people all working, more than full time. So this guy came here, was 17 at the time, and we actually hired him to do app designs first, and then he became a part of the entire team and just said one day, "Your logo looks like absolute garbage. Let me make you a new one." And that's what he did. And then that one just won and stuck around. So
I
and
love
the
it.
two,
I've seen that methodology a few times where someone just is honest with you. And I
yeah.
think that really builds like some sort of inherent trust, whereas like someone that is actually pretty close to you, and he's probably relying on you for payment, a wage, but he's like, this logo is terrible and it needs redone. And if they deliver on that, it does build the trust. So yeah, I think the VISS AI, like I think the name still sticks, right? It's like even though you've moved towards a model where you're describing in words and it is more kind of audio based in terms of the instructions, ultimately how's anyone going to understand it unless you visualize that, right? It's like you can tell me all about this, but until I can see it in action, I can't really comprehend how it works. With this, at the point you were founding it, specifically Norditech, you meet your co-founder David at this conference. You're speaking, he's speaking. How have you found the process of having a co-founder? Like, is there any difficulties you face? How do you kind of, because you're both entrepreneurs, you're both building your own stuff. How do you be like, you do this, I'll do this. Here's how we work together.
Yeah, that was also absolutely horrible in the beginning. I'll tell you that. No, it was. Look, I've always been this meticulous guy, planning way too much and trying to figure everything out before doing it. And David is completely the opposite. He doesn't give a shit. He just goes out and does it. It doesn't matter what it is. Let's deal with the consequences. We'll learn as we go. And that mix in the beginning did not work at all. Holy, the nights, I can tell you the arguments. Oh my god, good arguments for sure, and very fruitful. It's just, having like two extremes. Kind of, I was on the full strategy, full planning mode, never did anything. Hard to get out of bed to actually, get out and actually do the stuff I'm talking about. He's on the opposite. He doesn't do any planning. He just goes with it. And then clashing these two after a year or two together, you kind of start getting, you're kind of becoming, it's kind of like being married. You're becoming the other person. It feels like being married, like you're becoming the other person. And that mix actually ended up being absolutely what made this work in the first place. Because, we had these huge down moments where, everything's absolute crap, and you have these projects that need to be delivered, and we're running out of money. The stress is huge. Every single night you have to stay up until 11 and wake up at 6 to even have enough time to solve these problems. And in those times, that's what carried us. Being able to support each other, one being more active in just getting stuff done, one being more active in strategy, and then learning that from each other, so that now it's like we're both somewhere in the middle at this point. I
Yeah.
think that's what made it work for us. And I think that's also what's going to make it work in the future.
It sounds like a relationship that's built on mutual trust, respect, and admiration for each other. And slowly over time, you adopt, hopefully, a little bit of that good quality from each other, with you adopting a little bit about that, like, let's just build something, get it out there, work, and him building that kind of planning in as well. And I've certainly done that as well with my co-founders as well. Arturo is kind of more long-term enterprise focused. Let's slow down, relax, focus on the bigger picture. Martin's just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks as well, right? And
Yeah.
that's part
And
of
then
the fun is you have these different personalities.
a lot of arguments and long nights in between there, and there's some magic behind there.
Yeah, if you can have arguments and you can maintain that trust and respect, it just continues to strengthen that relationship, and we've seen that internally as well.
Yeah, no, it's really, really nice.
Something I'm super curious about, right? So you're saying the median age in your company is 22. You are based in Sweden, so I'm assuming majority kind of like Swedish workforce. You have these two different co-founders here, one more meticulous planner, one more just like let's go out and get after it. What does your internal team culture look like? Like, what are your North Stars that you abide by? What's the attitude internally?
Yeah, I think we discovered this. Like, we started thinking about how do we even describe this to people? Because every single person in the company, this is their life. Like, there's nothing outside of it. And, in the beginning, when it was just me and David, and then expanded kind of with one or two more people, it was kind of easy, right? There was not that much structure and information, and our lives were, wake up 6 in the morning, get to work, and then go to bed at 10, and then get to work at 6 in the morning, and that's just every single day. Doesn't matter if it's Christmas, New Year's Eve, your birthday, doesn't matter, Sundays, it doesn't matter. And that culture actually stuck with us this entire time. And we made sure to never hire people that we never wanted to force people into that culture. And in the beginning, like when we actually started getting some traction, we won the World Summit AI competition. We actually won like the Sweden's biggest innovation award. We had a bunch of articles in the biggest newspapers in Sweden, things like this. We got so many applications from people wanting to work here, which was really great. And we had, I'm not kidding, we had 50 interviews every month for the first, whatever time. And that's what we needed to do, because we couldn't, it's very, very hard to find people that have fit into a culture like this. And we decided early, like, let's not overhire. Let's hire people we know love this, that they're in it for this. This is why we live. This is what we want to do. And then let's try to make those people as efficient as possible. So we do a lot of upskilling internally, try to teach each other as much as possible, use any tool we can, use VISS.AI as much as we can. Try to upskill so that we're as efficient as we can possibly be. And that team culture, then we found out, you had this Netflix culture of no rules, things like this. That kind of came into play naturally. And it's just built kind of like you said on mutual respect. And you kind of see if someone's not working, it's because something's wrong.
Okay.
It's not because we say, oh, you have to work. It's because we know that you usually want to. What's happened? And there's usually a reason. And we live quite close to each other in the team. Some people are even living together in the same apartment, because that's not how we work here. But yeah, that team culture is extremely important, and we're going to have that going forward to see how long that works for. People get families, wives, kids. That changes, of course. But how it's looking right now, that's how we're going to take it as we go with that method. So
Interesting. Has any of the team culture been shaped by advice from your investors? You mentioned at the start that you'd raised investment, and I think it was two different rounds or two different companies that you've raised from. Has there been any mentorship there? And has that changed how you've kind of structured your approach to your internal team?
Not from so much from the investment, but
Okay.
I got in contact in there's a initiative in Sweden called Science Park, which is not the typical, you go to a science park and there's companies around. It's actually a company called Science Park, and it's partly governmental funded and EU funded. And they basically teach people about entrepreneurship. And I got in contact with them when I was 15, right? Very early. So they became these mentors, right? And that's where I got all my connections from growing up. And David, my co-founder, was actually the same. And I think that this culture that we have, we've never been advised to have. We've quite opposite, I would say, been advised not to have it because you can get burnt out, stressed. You might not sleep well. There might be too much pressure. You're doing too much too fast. You're too young. Like all of this, it's really great advice to get input on. But then you kind of just have to wake up in the morning and feel like this is what I want to do. And
Hmm.
if you don't do that anymore, look at why and understand yourself, why the people around you are acting the way they are, why you're acting the way you are, and try to work on personal growth and personal development instead. I think that's a core feature that every single person in our team has. They always look at themselves and try to be objectively and say, "You're doing this. This is shit. Change this. Why are you doing this? You're acting like you always have this self criticism that you work with to try and kind of understand and grow with. I don't think many mentors actually helped in the team culture part, even though our mentors have been absolutely wonderful in so many other aspects of our lives.
Interesting. It's just something that you have to shape for yourself. It's just something you have to feel out what works for you, what makes you happy, what's making the team happy, and go from there and really drive forward. I love it. I love it. I want to wrap up with two questions that lead on to one another. All right. And I'm going to take things a step out of this for a second, a step out of you and just your thoughts in general. You're obviously very intertwined with the AI space in general. You're very informed. You work with it on a daily basis. You work with companies. What are your kind of large scale predictions for the AI space or the automation space in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? And my sub question after that as well is like, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs that are now just entering the AI space and maybe thinking I should start an AI or an automation company?
Yeah, there's two predictions that I'm pretty confident in again, my opinion then, but we're going to see the death of a lot of startups. And by that, I mean every single startup that currently is just adding generative AI on top of an existing product. This is going to work. We're talking, like your emailing assistant, like an assistant that writes emails. And then Google comes out with, Gemini in Gmails. And all of a sudden, all of those startups that built that are completely dead or need to quickly find some pivot that will help them survive the next year. And that we're still continuing to see those startups, and those will work short term without any issues. Like you can earn a lot of money from it. It's a quick cash grab, if you want to call it that, probably. But as soon as products become more mature, these startups, there might be one that survives in each vertical or in each niche, but then on top of that, they're gonna die out, in my opinion, because you're not actually providing any new value. You're just trying to capitalize on the market, which is fine. I mean, there's more than one restaurant in the world. A lot of people are hungry, right? So we're going to see, though, a lot of startups dying because they're having a hard time selling. There's going to be a very competitive market, and there's not going to be that much of a need to integrate generative AI on top of every single product. That's one prediction for sure. Do you want to talk about that one a little bit? Because I can imagine there's a lot of things that goes into that.
I mean, I say the same. So I appear on podcasts, and to give you context, obviously, I've been at AI Tool Report since we started. We started in April 2023, grew
Yeah,
to 1,000 subscribers. So I read the news, I write the news on a daily basis, and we've saw the same thing where in the start, especially in 2023, you're seeing ChatGPT in a different wrapper every day, every second,
yeah,
every minute, right? And you see all these AI tools come about, and after a while, they start to do the exact same thing. And then within the past year, 6 months, what we've seen is that there tends to be one tool that's really, really good at an entire department's job. So if
yeah,
we were to look at marketing, someone might just be like, oh, I'll just use Ad Creative AI and it will do everything to do with that department. If I'm in operations, I might look at SmartSphere or Asana and it's got all those different features within that, right? And there's usually just one AI tool which will do an entire department's job. So we've saw the exact same thing. So it thus makes people entering the AI SaaS space specifically pretty difficult to do.
Yeah, for sure. And you'll see a lot of products that don't have that technical depth probably struggle in the future, is something I think. But then you also have, the other side of things, right? You have all of these generative AI startups kind of coming 80% of the way to solving something that's, holy shit, this is insane if we solve this. And they come this 80%. And the funny thing will be what happens when we start solving that last 20%, right? And when is AI actually going to become, applied at large scale? Because, research is great. We're researching AI, but there's so much that already exists that can be done, right? We're always trying to build stronger models, but with these models we have now, that's enough to build stuff for a lifetime. And what's going to be interesting to see is when the application rate of AI comes up, because we're talking in the Nordics, to Sweden, around 20% of organizations apply or use AI in some way. In the US, that number is 30 to 40%, which is way higher, but it's not really that high if you think about it. And when that number starts approaching 80, 90, 100, percentage of people in companies even using AI for some sort, you're not going to see these like 2x improvements in efficiency, right? Like in our company, our developers in the last year have gone, or in the last 2 years actually, have gone from being really good. Like they've been 10x developers just because they're so insanely talented. But now they multiplied that by 10 when the first AI tool came out, and then it multiplied by 5, and then multiplied by 2, and then multiplied by 2. All of a sudden, one engineer is sitting here doing things that 500 to maybe 1,000 engineers does on a month, which is insane. Imagine now if that was every person in a company. And I think we're going to start seeing, as AI becomes more applied, which hopefully we can help with, right? With AI, that's kind of why we're here, making it easier to apply it, the existing AI. As we see people do that, the efficiency in companies worldwide, I think, will be absolutely a shock to the system. And how we'll handle that, the consequences of that, that's a deep topic that has many angles, both positive and negative, that needs to be addressed.
With that being said, I'm an 18-year-old and I've just listened to this podcast and I'm like, Philip, that's pretty terrifying. I want to be an entrepreneur. I see as the future. What should I do? What should I educate myself on? How do I enter the space? What advice would you give them?
I would say if I was lucky enough to have these tools when I was 15, 16 and discovering, my passion for entrepreneurship, you can build and validate very quickly. It doesn't take long to build a prototype. You can prototype things with Lovable, which is GPT engineer, to build a website, a small tool, a prototype of it in minutes. You can do an automation in VISS.AI and add a nice interface on it. There are so many tools that let you prototype quickly, but you have to validate it. And that goes back to applying AI. Just build whatever idea you think of. You can come up with 20 ideas in a few hours, I'm sure, if you're really interested. Build some of them and show them to people, measure their reaction, and then based on that, decide what to do next. Because that's something I missed completely. I did not show it to enough people, even though I wish I would have. So get people's opinions on it, because without those, again, you can build however many cool stuff in your basement you want. If no one sees it, no one uses it, they're absolutely useless. And trust me, it's a lot of fun when people see the value that you see in a product that you build.
What a full circle moment. We started the interview off with, why do you build cool shit? And then the answer is build cool shit and get feedback as well. So we're finished on the perfect note, Philip. I want
Right.
to thank you for taking the time. I know that you're probably incredibly busy. So thank you. I really appreciate it. If anyone wants to maybe contact you, find out more about the company, how do they go about doing that?
The absolute best way is going on the website and finding my contact details. VISS.AI, VISS.AI. I will answer. I answer everything.
Cool. Perfect. I mean, you can't mistake it. VISS.ai. Simple. Thank you.